The December wind swept through Manhattan with a merciless chill, sharp enough to cut through even the thickest coat. Snowflakes tumbled from the sky in slow spirals, catching the glow of golden street lamps and settling on the pavement like a thin layer of stardust. Frank Williams pulled his cashmere coat tight around himself, though it did little to block the icy bite that crept under his collar. The streets were half empty at this hour, most New Yorkers choosing warmth over winter's theater, but Frank had always preferred to walk these 3 blocks home. It was a habit he'd never broken, not even after Forbes had placed him among the city's most powerful men. The chauffeured car waited at the curb every evening, the driver ready with polished shoes and a rehearsed smile, but Frank would wave him off. These walks were his rebellion, 3 blocks of anonymity where no board members, no shareholders, and no headlines could follow. Tonight, though, his thoughts were darker than usual. His mother's health had declined rapidly over the last week, and even though she'd once been a force of will, strong enough to guide him through the storm of his father's early death and the demands of legacy, she was now slipping away. In a hospital bed that smelled of antiseptic, Frank hated how powerless he felt. Billionaire or not, no amount of money could buy more time. That truth gnawed at him as he crossed the quiet avenue, snow crunching beneath his Italian leather shoes. He didn't notice the wallet slipping from his pocket until a voice soft, almost hesitant, called out behind him, "Sir, sir, you dropped this." He turned sharply, his instincts sharpened by years of guarding his empire against opportunists. But what he saw stopped him cold. A woman, perhaps in her early 30s, was standing a few feet away. Her beauty was unmistakable, though dulled by exhaustion and hardship. Her coat was thin, passed at the elbows, and her fingers trembled as she held out the leather wallet. Beside her stood a little girl, bundled in clothes far too light for the weather, clutching a threadbare teddy bear to her chest. The child's golden curls glistened with melting snowflakes, framing eyes of such piercing blue that Frank felt a jolt in his chest. He accepted the wallet, flipping it open to make sure over $1,000 in cash still sat neatly folded. Inside, "There's a fortune in here," he said, more to himself than to them. "You could have just taken it." The woman lifted her chin, her voice steady though her body trembled. "We may not have much, sir, but we have our dignity." Her words struck him harder than the wind, pride mixed with quiet desperation. He studied her face, and then the little girl, who suddenly coughed, a harsh sound that rattled through her small frame. "Mommy, I'm cold," the girl whispered, her voice weak as she pressed the worn teddy closer. The woman knelt down quickly, wrapping her thin jacket tighter around her daughter's shoulders. "I know, Lily," she murmured, her voice cracking. "We'll find somewhere warm soon." Frank should have walked away. That was what the old version of him, the pragmatic businessman, would have done. A wallet returned, a thank you given, and the matter closed. But something in the way the child's eyes clung to his own held him in place. They weren't just curious eyes, they seemed to search him, to peel back the layers he kept hidden from the world. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "The shelter on 43rd, the woman answered, not meeting his gaze. "If they're not full yet." After a pause, she added, "I'm Abby, and this is my daughter, Lily." The girl tilted her head at him, as if trying to place a memory that wouldn't quite form. Her lips parted, and she leaned close to her mother, whispering words too soft for him to hear. Whatever she said made Abby's expression flicker first. Confusion, then something like unease. She cast a quick glance at Frank, then shook her head slightly, urging Lily to stay quiet. "What is it?" he asked, unable to ignore the tension in her face. "Nothing," Abby said quickly. "Just something silly." But Frank wasn't convinced. He could still feel Lily's eyes locked on him, wide and knowing, as though she carried a secret, too heavy for a child to hold. The snow fell harder, the air colder, and Lily coughed again. Frank noticed the flush in her cheeks, not the pink of winter wind, but the dangerous red of fever. Against every instinct that warned him about the dangers of strangers, he heard himself say words he didn't expect. "The shelters are always overcrowded this time of year. I have space in my home, just for tonight, until you figure something out." Abby froze, her posture rigid. "We don't accept charity from strangers." "It's not charity," Frank said quickly, his tone almost pleading, though he couldn't explain why this mattered so much. "It's just human decency. Your daughter is sick." Lily coughed again, her tiny body shaking, and Abby's resolve cracked. She looked down at her child, then back up at Frank, her suspicion battling with something softer, desperate hope. Just one night, she said finally. For Lily's sake. Frank raised his hand, hailing a yellow cab that slid to the curb. As the three of them climbed inside, he caught Lily's voice again, whispering to her mother. Abby stiffened, her face unreadable. And as the taxi pulled away from the snowy curb, Frank realized his life had just shifted in a way he couldn't yet understand. The little girl's eyes still lingered on him, to knowing, to haunting, as if she already understood something about him that he had yet to discover. The taxi's heater groaned against the December cold, filling the cramped space with an uneven warmth that fogged the windows. Frank sat across from Abby and her daughter, his gloved hands resting on his knees, but his gaze kept drifting to the little girl pressed against her mother's side. Lily's lashes fluttered as if heavy with fever, but her eyes never stopped, studying him, blue and bright. They held an intensity far beyond her years, so intense that Frank felt as though she was silently asking questions he didn't yet have the answers to. Abby's posture was stiff, protective. She angled her body to shield Lily, keeping one hand on the child's back and the other clutching the tattered teddy bear that served as Lily's comfort. Frank knew that look, it was the same one his mother had given him decades ago, after his father's sudden death. Fierce love wrapped in exhaustion, a vow to protect at all costs, even if the world crumbled. He almost admired Abby for it. When the taxi pulled up to the iron gates of the Williams estate, Abby's breath caught. The mansion rose against the snowy night like something out of a different universe. Its towering weight of stone and glass, its glowing windows, its driveway lined with bare elms sparkling with frost. She looked away quickly, her pride raw. Against the sight of such abundance, Lily, however, leaned forward, her face pressed to the window, eyes widening at the lights that twinkled like fallen stars. The driver stopped at the grand staircase, and Frank stepped out first, brushing the snow from his shoulders. He turned to help Abby and Lily, but Abby hesitated. "This feels wrong," she murmured. "People like us don't belong in places like this." Frank held her gaze, his voice steady. "Tonight, it doesn't matter where you belong. Tonight, it matters that your daughter is warm." Something in his tone disarmed her. She swallowed her pride and followed him up the steps, clutching Lily's hand as though afraid the mansion itself might swallow her whole. The massive oak doors opened, and the butler, Harold, blinked in surprise at the sight of them. Frank had never brought strangers home, especially not like this. Harold's training kept him silent, but the flicker of judgment in his eyes didn't escape Abby. She stiffened again, but Frank's sharp look silenced the butler before he could speak. Inside, the mansion felt colder in spirit than the streets outside. Marble floors gleamed, chandeliers sparkled, but the silence was oppressive. Abby's eyes darted to the oil paintings along the hall, portraits of solemn-faced ancestors, all with the same proud eyes Frank carried. Lily, however, slowed near one particular painting. It was of a woman in her younger years, regal in a silk gown, her gaze piercing even through canvas. Lily tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, though Frank caught every word, "Mommy, she looks like my grandma." Abby paled, pulling Lily quickly away from the frame. "Don't say that," she hissed softly. "It's just a painting." But Frank's heart stuttered. The painting was of his mother, Margaret Williams, in her 30s. He turned to Abby, confused. "What did she say?" "Nothing," Abby answered quickly, her eyes avoiding his. "Kids say silly things." Lily, undeterred, looked back at the portrait with unsettling certainty. Her small voice carried like a ghost in the cavernous hall. "I know her face. She's Grandma." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the muffled sound of snow falling against the windows. Abby tightened her grip on Lily's hand, whispering for her to stay quiet. But Frank felt his pulse pounding in his ears. How could a 5-year-old girl, a stranger's daughter, recognize his mother so easily? They moved deeper into the mansion, but the words lingered in the air, heavier than the winter storm outside. Frank found himself looking at Abby differently now, not just as a woman down on her luck, but as someone tethered to a mystery that touched the very core of his family. And though his mind told him it was impossible, his heart whispered otherwise. This was not chance. When Harold returned with blankets and hot tea, Abby pulled Lily close and tried to settle her on the velvet sofa. Lily's fevered cheeks glowed against the deep red fabric, and as she drifted in and out of sleep, she hummed softly, the sound, Froze Frank mid-step. It was the lullaby, the same tune his mother had sung to him when he was a boy, long before he inherited empires and titles, a song so private he hadn't heard it in decades. Yet this little girl carried it on her lips as though it was hers all along. Frank turned to Abby, his voice low, almost trembling. Where did she learn that song? Abby blinked, confusion etched into her face. I don't know. She just sings things sometimes. I thought she made it up. Frank's chest tightened. The world outside was buried under snow, but inside, he felt a different storm rising. A storm of secrets clawing their way back to the surface. Lily stirred, her voice faint but clear as she whispered in her sleep. Grandma said not to be afraid. And for the first time in years, Frank Williams, billionaire and master of empires, felt truly afraid. After snow battered against the tall windows of the Williams mansion, muffling the city outside in a blanket of silence. Inside, the flickering fire in a marble hearth did little to ease the chill that had settled deep into Frank's bones. He sat in the armchair opposite Abby and Lily, his eyes fixed on the child curled against her mother. Lily's breathing was uneven, her fever pressing heat into her small frame, yet her lips still moved faintly, half whispers, half dreams. Each time the name Grandma slipped from her mouth, Frank's pulse hammered harder. Abby brushed her daughter's curls back, her face drawn tight with worry. She looked up once and caught Frank staring, his expression unreadable, but intense, as though he was trying to solve a riddle carved into her very skin. You're staring, Abby said finally, her voice low but defensive. Frank blinked, dragged back to himself. I'm sorry. It's just what she said. The painting, the lullaby. She's a child, Abby snapped softly, but her tone betrayed more than irritation. It trembled with fear. She says things she doesn't understand. Please don't read into it. But Frank couldn't let it go. That song, my mother used to sing it to me every night. No one else in this house knows it. No one outside this family. Abby's mouth opened, then shut again. Her eyes shifted away, and Frank caught a hesitation. A flash of something she didn't want him to see. Lily stirred in her sleep, her voice fragile, but haunting. Don't cry, Grandma. I'll tell him soon. Frank stood so abruptly the fire iron clattered against the stone. Abby pulled Lily closer, her heart pounding as she looked at him. What is going on? His voice was sharp, demanding, almost desperate. Why does your daughter talk as though she knows my mother? Why does she look at me as if she's known me all her life? Abby's lips trembled. I don't know. But the words rang hollow in the grand hall. The storm outside grew harsher, wind howling through the chimneys like a chorus of warning. Frank paced before the fire, his polished shoes tapping against the floor like a heartbeat. Where are you from? He asked suddenly, turning to her. Queens, Abby said quickly. We moved around a lot after my husband died. Frank narrowed his eyes, and before Queens, Abby swallowed. It doesn't matter. It does. His tone cut like a blade. Because somehow, your daughter knows things she shouldn't. Things only family could know. The word hung heavy in the air. Family. Abby's shoulders stiffened. Her hands gripped Lily protectively, as though Frank might snatch the child away. We are not your family, she whispered. We're just a people trying to survive. Frank leaned forward, his voice low but thunderous with emotion. Then explain why I feel like I've seen her eyes before. Explain why she hums the songs my mother used to sing. Explain why she looked at my mother's portrait and called her grandma without hesitation. Abby had no answer. The fire crackled, the storm screamed, and in the silence between them, the walls of the mansion seemed to close in. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Harold, the butler, appeared, his face pale. Sir, forgive the interruption, but your mother is awake. She insists on seeing you. Frank's chest tightened. His mother had been weak for days, barely conscious, her voice reduced to faint murmurs. For her to demand his presence meant something had changed. He glanced at Abby and Lily, then back at Harold. Bring them. Came Margaret Williams's voice from the hallway, frail, but commanding, carried by an authority that time and illness hadn't erased. Abby's breath hitched. She knows about us? Frank frowned. What do you mean, us? Before Abby could answer, Lily's eyes fluttered open, fever bright, but sharp with an eerie calm. She looked past Frank toward the shadowed corridor, where the old woman waited and whispered, clear as day. I told you, Mommy. Grandma was waiting. Frank froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. Abby's face drained of color, and somewhere, deep in the house, Margaret Williams, the formidable matriarch, the keeper of secrets, was waiting to unleash truths that had been buried for decades. The mansion no longer felt like a place of shelter. It felt like a stage, and the play that was about to begin would strip every mask, every wall, every carefully guarded lie bare. Asterisk, the long hallway to Margaret Williams's chamber seemed to stretch endlessly, its silence broken only by the soft creak of floorboards and the faint rustle of velvet curtains. As the storm outside beat against the glass, Frank walked ahead, his fists clenched, the tension in his shoulders betraying his unease. Abby followed reluctantly, clutching Lily in her arms. Every step she took deeper into the mansion made her chest tighten, as though the house itself was judging her presence. The corridor was lined with portraits of the Williams dynasty, stern men in tailored suits, elegant women in silks and pearls. Their painted eyes seemed to follow Abby and Lily, their gazes sharp with the weight of history and pride. Lily, half drowsy from her fever, stirred and lifted her head. Her tiny hand pointed toward one particular painting, a young Margaret, her beauty radiant, her eyes strikingly similar to Lily's own. "Grandma," the child whispered, her voice fragile but certain. Abby shushed her quickly, panic flashing across her face. But Frank had heard it. His stride faltered, and for a moment his carefully constructed walls of logic and skepticism trembled. At the end of the hall, Harold opened the carved wooden doors with a reverence usually reserved for holy places. Inside, the room smelled faintly of lavender and age, the scent of fading grandeur. The fire crackled low in the hearth, and beside it, Margaret Williams sat propped against a mountain of embroidered pillows, her once commanding figure now reduced by time and illness. Yet her presence was no less formidable, even in weakness. Her eyes burned with authority, sharp enough to cut through stone. Her gaze fell first on Frank, softening with maternal recognition. Then it shifted to Abby and Lily, and for the briefest flicker, something unspoken passed across her face: shock, sorrow, and something dangerously close to guilt. "You brought them," Margaret said, her voice low but steady, carrying the weight of inevitability. Frank frowned. "You asked to see us, Mother. Do you know them?" Abby froze, every instinct screaming at her to flee, but Margaret raised a trembling hand toward her. "Come closer, child. Let me see you." Abby shook her head. "We shouldn't be here." But Lily wriggled free from her mother's arms, her small feet pattering across the Persian rug. She went straight to Margaret's bedside with the fearless certainty only a child could carry. Without hesitation, she placed her fever-warmed hand on the old woman's wrinkled one. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice breaking into a cough. "Why did you leave Mommy when she needed you?" The room collapsed into silence. The fire popped loudly, and Frank felt as though the ground beneath him had given way. His mother's face went pale, the words piercing her like a blade drawn from the past. "Lily." Abby rushed forward, pulling her daughter back, her voice trembling with panic. "Don't say things you don't understand." But Margaret's frail hand clung to Lily's with surprising strength. Tears welled in the old woman's eyes, slipping down her withered cheeks. She looked at Abby, her lips trembling as though the weight of years was crushing her chest. Asterisk, "I thought I would never see you again," Margaret whispered, her voice cracking under decades of regret. Frank staggered back, his mind reeling. "See her again, Mother? What are you talking about?" Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, as if summoning strength from some hidden well. When she opened them again, they glistened with unshed tears. "Frank, there are truths I buried so deep, I prayed the earth would never return them. But the past has a cruel way of finding its way home." Frank's voice rose, edged with fury and disbelief. "Mother, what is she to you? Why does this child, this stranger, speak as if she knows you?" Margaret's hand shook as she reached for Abby's face, her touch hesitant, almost reverent. "Because she is not a stranger, Frank. She is the blood you were never told about. Her mother was the one I failed, the one I cast aside." Abby's face crumpled, tears threatening to spill, but her voice trembled with anger. "Don't you dare pretend now. You didn't just cast her aside, you destroyed her life." Frank's head snapped between them, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. "What is she saying? Mother, what did you do?" The storm outside lashed against the windows, thunder rolling like a warning drum. Margaret's chest heaved as she whispered the words that would fracture everything Frank believed about his family. "Abby is your sister." The room spun, the fire seemed to dim, the walls closing in. Abby's tears fell freely now, a mixture of grief and rage. while Frank stood frozen, his entire world collapsing in a single breath. Lily, still holding Margaret's hand, looked up at Frank with those piercing blue eyes, the same eyes his mother once had, and whispered softly, "I told you, Mommy, Grandma remembers." For the first time in decades, Margaret Williams wept openly. The weight of her sins laid bare before them all, and Frank, the man who had conquered empires, found himself powerless against a truth that stripped him to his core. The mansion no longer felt like a sanctuary. It had become a vault, and every locked door was opening to release the ghost within. The silence that followed Margaret's words was suffocating. The fire in the hearth hissed and cracked, shadows dancing across the walls like restless ghosts. Frank stood rooted to the spot, every muscle in his body taut, as though his entire world had tilted off its axis. His mother's frail confession echoed in his ears, "Abby is your sister." The words didn't just rattle his mind. They shattered the foundation of everything he thought he knew about his family. Abby, her arms still wrapped protectively around Lily, stared at Margaret with eyes blazing. Years of buried pain surged to the surface, spilling into her trembling voice. "Now you say it. After all these years, now you call me daughter?" Margaret's hand quivered as she reached out, though the gesture was feeble. "I was wrong, so wrong, but at the time, I was terrified. Your mother came to me when the scandal first threatened to break. Your father, God rest him, made a mistake, and you were the living proof. If society had discovered what he'd done, everything we built, everything we stood for, would have collapsed." Frank's fist clenched at his sides. "So you buried the truth to protect your reputation?" His voice was thick with rage and disbelief. "You destroyed lives for the sake of appearances?" Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears. "I convinced myself it was to protect you. You were so young. Frank, you needed stability, a clean legacy. I thought, if I cut her out, if I erased that chapter, no one would ever use it against us." Abby's laugh was bitter, a sound sharp enough to slice through the room. "Erase me? Do you have any idea what that meant for us? My mother died alone, ashamed, with nothing. She carried your secrets to her grave, while I grew up without knowing who I truly was. You locked me out of a life that should have been mine, and for what? Your name in magazines, your perfect family portraits?" Frank's heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. He turned to Abby, his face pale, his voice hoarse. You're my sister?" Abby's eyes softened for a fleeting moment, but the pain behind them never left. "Half-sister, yes. The blood that runs through you runs through me too, whether you like it or not." Lily, still clutching Margaret's trembling hand, looked up at Frank with wide, fever-bright eyes. "Uncle Frank," she said softly, as if the words had always been waiting. The room reeled. Frank stumbled back a step, the weight of it crushing his chest. "Uncle." The title felt foreign, almost unbearable, and yet undeniable. He looked at the little girl, her innocent face shining with trust, and his throat tightened. He couldn't speak. Margaret broke the silence, her voice shaking. "I tried to reach out once, years ago, but shame silenced me. By the time I swallowed my pride, it was too late. Abby's mother was gone, and I was too much a coward to face what I had done. I told myself the past would stay buried, but here she is. The past, alive, in this child's eyes." Abby pulled Lily closer, her voice thick with fury. "And now you think you can just admit it and be forgiven? You think tears can wash away years of hunger, years of being invisible, years of explaining to my little girl why we had no one to turn to? You abandoned us before we even had a chance." Frank pressed his palms to his temples, his voice cracking as he turned to his mother. "All these years, you told me we were a family of honor, of dignity. You built me into the man I am. But you built me on lies." Margaret's tears spilled freely, streaking her lined cheeks. "I thought I was protecting you. I see now. I was only protecting myself." Thunder boomed outside, rattling the glass panes. The storm screamed against the mansion, as if the heavens themselves were furious at the sins being unearthed. Lily stirred in Abby's arms, her small voice breaking the heavy silence. "Grandma, don't cry. Mommy says crying makes the heart hurt more." She reached out a tiny hand, brushing away a tear from Margaret's cheek with the simple tenderness only a child could offer. The gesture shattered something inside Frank. His world had been neatly ordered, defined by numbers, deals, and power. Now it was chaos. Yet, amidst the storm of betrayal, he saw something else, a fragile thread binding them together. This child, innocent and unbroken by the bitterness of the past, was trying to stitch together what decades of secrets had torn apart. Frank's voice was quiet, but edged with steel. No more lies. Not one more secret in this house. Tomorrow, I want the truth, all of it. Every letter, every photograph, every memory you tried to erase. I want to know everything you kept from me. Margaret's body shook with exhaustion, but she nodded, guilt and relief mingling in her tired eyes. You will have it, all of it. Abby looked at Frank, her face hardened. Don't think this makes us family. Blood doesn't erase what was done. Trust isn't given, it's earned, and you have a lifetime of debt to pay. Frank met her gaze, and for the first time, the ruthless businessman in him faltered. He didn't see Abby as a burden or a scandal. He saw her as the missing piece of a story he never knew was broken, and Lily was the thread that bound them all. Whether they wanted it or not, the storm raged on, but inside the mansion, the true tempest was only beginning. The storm raged through the night, hammering the windows with icy fists, as if the world outside demanded to be let in on the secrets being unearthed within the mansion. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing faintly in the hearth, casting Margaret's face in shadows that deepened the hollows of her illness. Frank stood rigid near the window, his reflection fractured against the frosted glass, while Abby sat close to Lily, who now slept fitfully against her mother's chest. The silence was unbearable. Every breath, every heartbeat seemed to echo like a drum. Finally, Frank turned from the window, his eyes burning with a mix of fury and desperate need. Mother, he said, his voice low but trembling, you told me everything you did was for me, that you built this empire to protect me, but what you protected wasn't me, it was a lie. You have one chance left. Tell me everything. Don't spare me. Don't protect me. The truth, in full. Tonight. Margaret's lips parted as if the words resisted leaving her. She closed her eyes, drawing in a trembling breath, before speaking. It began with your father, she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of memory. He was a brilliant man, but lonely in ways I could never touch. There was another woman, quiet, gentle, from a world far from ours. Her name was Clara. Abby's body stiffened, her hands tightening around Lily, my mother. She whispered. Margaret nodded weakly. Yes, she never wanted to ruin us. She never demanded anything. She only wanted her child to be safe. But your father, he wanted to acknowledge Abby. He wanted both of you to know each other one day. He even wrote letters. I burned. Frank's heart lurched. You burned them. Margaret's tears spilled freely. I couldn't bear the scandal. I had already clawed my way into the elite of this city, and with one slip, they would have cast us out. I told myself I was protecting our legacy, but I was protecting my pride. Clara begged me for help when Abby was a little girl. I turned her away. Abby's voice cracked, her anger sharpened by grief. She died working 3 jobs, trying to keep me fed. Do you know how many nights I listened to her cry herself to sleep? Do you know what it's like to be told you're unwanted, not by strangers, but by the family that should have loved you? Margaret reached out, her hand shaking violently. And yet here you are, strong, fierce. Everything I denied you, you carved out of the world with your bare hands. And Lily, her gaze drifted to the child, her voice softening. She carries all of it, the innocence, the truth. She is what I destroyed and what I longed for. Frank pressed a hand against the wall, his chest tight. So all this, my empire, my name was built on the ashes of a woman you silenced, and a sister I never knew I had. And now I am supposed to what? Forgive? Abby's eyes blazed. Forgiveness isn't yours to demand. You've lived in towers of glass and steel while we begged for shelter. Your world is power. Mine was survival. Don't you dare tell me forgiveness is simple. The storm howled, rattling the panes as though the house itself trembled. Margaret sank deeper into her pillows, her strength fading. I don't ask forgiveness, she whispered. I ask only that you don't let my sins define you. Frank, Abby, if I could give you back the years, I would. But all I have left are the truths I can no longer bury. Her eyes fluttered, but before she slipped into silence, she looked directly at Lily and whispered words that seemed to carry the weight of prophecy. You will bind what I broke. The room plunged into stillness. Lily stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand brushing against Frank's as if by accident. The touch seared him, fragile yet undeniable. He looked down at her innocent face, then at Abby's guarded, furious expression. In that moment, he understood the empire he thought was his legacy was nothing compared to the responsibility lying in front of him now. Abby's voice cut through the silence. You can't undo what's been done, but you can choose what happens next. Just know this: I will never let her grow up with the lies you were fed. Frank met her gaze, his voice steady but raw. Then maybe it's time the truth built something stronger than lies ever could. Margaret's breathing grew shallow, her chest rising and falling with effort. She had given them her confession, but the final reckoning was yet to come. The storm outside began to wane, but inside the mansion, the tempest of betrayal, blood, and fragile hope was far from over. The night had revealed the skeletons of the past. The morning would decide if they could survive the weight of them. The dawn broke reluctantly over Manhattan. The storm finally spent, leaving behind a city coated in fragile white silence. Sunlight crept through the frostbitten windows of the Williams mansion, staining the marble floors with pale gold. Inside Margaret's chamber, the stillness was heavy, weighted by confessions that had ripped through the night. The embers in the fireplace glowed faintly, the last remnants of a fire that had witnessed the undoing of decades of lies. Frank stood by the window, his eyes hollow, his tailored suit wrinkled from a sleepless night. He had built his entire life on certainty, on numbers, contracts, outcomes he could control. Now, standing in his own home, he felt like a stranger in a life that had never truly belonged to him. His mother's words still clawed at his mind. Abby is your sister. On the other side of the room, Abby sat in a chair pulled close to the bed, her arms around Lily, who finally slept peacefully. Her fever cooled in the hush of morning. Abby's face, lit by the shy light of dawn, was still sharp with mistrust. She had no reason to believe the Williams name was anything but a curse, and yet there was a flicker in her eyes, a longing she couldn't extinguish, even as pride kept her. Spine stiff, Margaret stirred weakly, her frail body seeming smaller against the mountain of pillows. Her breaths came shallow, uneven, but her eyes found Frank with the clarity he hadn't seen in weeks. Frank. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He crossed to her side, kneeling down, his anger tempered by something more dangerous: grief. Mother, you've given me nothing but walls. How do I forgive you now, at the end, when you've left me with rubble? Her hand trembled as she reached for him, brushing against his cheek like she had when he was a boy. Because forgiveness isn't for me, it's for you. If you carry my sins like chains, they will drown you. But if you let them go, you can finally live free of me. Abby's voice cut in, sharp but shaking. Easy for you to say. You had everything, we had nothing. My mother died because of your choices. Why should either of us let that go? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Because if you don't, the darkness I carried will be the same darkness you pass to your daughter. Her gaze flicked toward Lily, who stirred faintly in her sleep, and she deserves better. The room fell into silence, the truth heavy in the morning light. Then Lily's voice broke through, soft and certain, though her eyes remained closed in half-dream. Grandma says she's sorry. Grandma says Uncle Frank won't be lonely anymore. Frank's breath caught in his chest. Abby's eyes widened, fear and wonder mingling in her expression. Margaret wept openly, her body trembling as though the little girl had plucked her soul bare. How does she know that? Frank whispered, his voice cracking. Abby shook her head. She's always been like this. She says things she shouldn't know. I thought it was just imagination, but she looked at Margaret, whose face was wet with tears. Maybe she hears truths we're too blind to see. Margaret's strength faltered, her hand slipping from Frank's cheek. Promise me. She gasped, her voice breaking. You'll protect them, both of them, not as charity, as family. Frank's heart, fractured and raw, finally gave way. He gripped her hand tightly, pressing it against his forehead. I promise. No more lies. No more walls. They're mine to protect now. Abby's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing for the first time in years. She let someone else carry part of the weight she'd borne alone. Margaret exhaled, one final trembling breath, her lips forming the faintest smile as her eyes closed. The room fell silent again, but the silence was different this time, not the suffocating silence of secrets, but the fragile quiet of release. Frank stood slowly, his mother's hand slipping gently from his grasp. He looked at Abby, then at Lily, who stirred awake, her blue eyes blinking open. She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered with disarming certainty, You don't look lonely anymore, Uncle Frank. The words pierced him deeper than any revelation, because they weren't just the innocent observation of a child. They were a verdict, a promise, a new beginning. Frank crossed the room, Lowering himself to one knee before Lily, his voice shook, but his eyes were steady. "You're right. I'm not. Because I have you." Abby's tears finally spilled, her walls cracking. For the first time, she didn't see Frank Williams, the billionaire. She saw her brother flawed, broken, but reaching for the same fragile hope she had clung to for years. The storm outside had passed, but inside the mansion, something greater had been born, a family pieced together not by perfection, but by the courage to face the truth and choose love anyway. The empire of Frank Williams would no longer be defined by money, power, or legacy. It would be defined by a little girl's voice on a winter morning, by the strength of a woman who had survived abandonment, and by a man who finally found his heart in the place he least expected. And as the sun rose higher, warming the mansion's cold walls, Frank realized the most shocking revelation of all, that forgiveness, once impossible, could grow in the unlikeliest soil.